Hello. First of all, let me tell you that it's a great joy for being again amongst you, if I'm not mistaken, in this 20th Corporate Responsibility Conference. I've had the great joy and honor to participate in at least 4 previous ones. These are conferences which are not organized for a conference's sake, and I firmly believe that because the Hellenic American Chamber of Commerce really shows the way vis-à-vis CSR with these excellent events. And I would also say that there's also some kind of success prescription, a recipe, a success recipe, because if you've got such a beautiful organization headed by Mr. Spitounas Bakatsellou and Mr. Papakis Papadimitriou, and the ever-active and omnipresent Angela Boyadji, and I would like one further warm applause for her. So when you have such an impeccable organization and have an excellent audience, as is your case, being here, physically present or virtually, and at the same time you have renowned speakers, all this lead to the recipe of success. On a subject, however, which can bring anything but broad smiles, because as Mr. Bakatsallou very appositely said, the word of crisis has lost its meaning in our days. We leave one crisis to enter another. We have a whole generation, Generation Z, that has grown exclusively in conditions of crisis. Remember the MOUs in 2010, what followed with these incredible rates of unemployment in our country, and what followed, reaching the pandemic and now the energy crisis, which eventually will come out, but what we will never come out very easily, and I believe this is the huge challenge for our country and the planet as a whole, is the climate change, the climate crisis. Because we cannot set a ceiling or a threshold for the climate crisis, as it could be with any economic activity, for instance. Therefore, the climate crisis will be the great wage, and very well said on our conference. We need resilience, we need adaptability, and we need perseverance, so as to overcome all those challenges. These are the prerequisites for sustainability. But I would also add the most important, to my humble opinion, if you allow, is empathy. The perception and the way we perceive the world around us, how we perceive your employees, the people in the street, all the people, the human beings that constitute the society we live in. Empathy vis-à-vis both the decisions and implementation of decisions and activities. Empathy is most important, because it doesn't suffice to attain goals as long as we leave people behind. Of course, that could be an ideal society where there would be no people left back. Yes, that's true. Nevertheless, we must do our best so as for the end of the day, at the end of the day, the fewer numbers of co-citizens left behind, the better it will be. That was in guise of introduction. I apologize if I took too much time. I don't know, Pakis, how you originally planned the whole event, but having Margaritis Schinas, the Vice President of the European Commission, on such a day where the whole of Europe discusses what will happen in Italy and the European Union, what Giorgia Meloni is to do and her allies, Salvini, Berlusconi, and so forth, this indeed is the jackpot. And now we have the person par excellence to speak on the matter, Mr. Margaritis Schinas. Mr. Commissioner, a great joy and honor. We would have preferred to have you here, but what can we do?
So would I, sir. I would prefer to be in Athens. But it's a day on which, well, all these developments and all these things have a very burdened agenda for you in Brussels. And this is what I would like us to start this discussion with. We don't have a lot of time, we have 20 minutes ahead of us. So what's the deal with Italy and the new data? Because, well, we have Europe that is trying to respond to these increased demands due to the energy crisis, and we've been trying for months to reach a decision. What will happen should Meloni and the next coalition of Italy, the third largest economy in Europe, says no, or says something different? Good afternoon, everyone. Mr. Andritsos. Before answering your question about Italy, I should like to seize this opportunity and, well, use your introduction and make my own introduction to the introduction. I should like to say that it is true that crises hurt us in a very deep, constant, I would say, way, continuous way. These are crises that, according to Newark, would be called polycrises that started as early as 2010. And it's been 10 or 12 years of crisis now. But from these crises, we can draw two conclusions, I think, which actually apply to what happens in Italy as well. The first conclusion drawn is that all these crises, well, shattered us, shook us, maybe shook us profoundly, but they did not demolish us as Europeans. We proved, and I speak in the first plural, not as the European Union, but as a union of republics and democracies, democratic countries. We proved much more strong and much more resilient than what some of our enemies thought and believed. The second conclusion drawn is that these 10 or 12 years of crises contributed to something else. They contributed to putting an end to what I like to refer to the end of European innocence. It took a pandemic to understand that we're not snorkeling around in Europe. It took a war to understand that energy is not as granted as we took it for. We needed these movements and these flows of immigration to understand that the world is not so naive and so innocent as we thought. Which brings me back to Italy, and I say that Europe is a union of democracies, of republics. We have nothing to fear from the ballot boxes. Free elections, free expression, the expression of the people in all member states of the EU is possibly the constituent of what we refer to as the European way of life, which makes us different the world over. Of course, in this case, we heard a lot in the pre-election period. The closer we got to the Italian elections, these many things became more mainstream, less critical, more realistic, more pragmatic even. So we have to wait and see whether this government will follow this road of pragmatism and will leave this inflammatory narrative. And another thing that we all learned in Europe together in all this hardship is that no government, no states, be they big or small, northern or southern or whatever, can make it on its own vis-à-vis the threats and the challenges we have to cope with. So we hope. Now, regarding the pragmatism you referred to, Commissioner, could it be that this pragmatism creates, paves the way for the next step? Well, what I'm saying is, it's an educated guess, I would say, is that we lived through phenomena of populism that in the pre-election period went rather well, but when they tried to express themselves as a government, had to step on more solid ground. I don't think that pragmatism goes against this perception, this concept, this view that the only way to go forward in Europe is together. I don't think that any country, any member state finds solutions outside the European Union or against the European Union. And let's focus on Italy. Italy is is part of the backbone of the EU. It's the third strongest economy. At the moment, on the other hand, they are waiting to receive 200 million from the recovery fund. It's the biggest part of the pie, you see. share of the lion. Then they have a huge refugee crisis in the Mediterranean. Do you believe that the new government will deal with these problems on their own with a back turn to Europe? Quite the contrary, I believe. Well, you did say earlier about Europe coming of age, becoming an adult, and it's very important because we used to have a Europe in the past that was based on the best scenario, and it took successive crises in order for us to find the plan Bs, the alternative plans, and we had to suffer until that. Now, regarding the health threats, are they high on the Commission's agenda, Commissioner? Well, this end of innocence, the crash course, in a sense, was proven in how the EU dealt with the pandemic. As you know, I've spent 30 years of my life in EU politics, and I never once missed the historicity of this institution. When, as member of the college, we had to decide on the largest vaccination program in the history of humanity, or how to deal with the deficits and the shortcomings and the lacks of respirators and masks, and how to see that the European pharma industry will have at its disposal all the raw material they need. And all this damned 2020, during which this game was played, I believe it was crucial to give the European Union the resilience in order to deal with the health crises. I mean, not only were we able to fight the fires that broke out, but we managed to build around the pandemic dealing a prevention network with more systemic improvements in the healthcare systems, in the community organizations, the decision-making process, and the resources allocation. And I can say that we're much more ready in health than we were in 2020. Right, the other big issue, because you are responsible for the promotion of the European way of life. How does one define this European way of life, Mr. Schinas? Given the refugee/immigration flows that Europe needs to respond to, the member states individually, but the Commission as a whole. Well, I believe that the best definition of the European way of life was given by Emmanuel Macron during his famed speech in the Sorbonne in fall of 2017, when he said that, for me, the European way of life is two things. It's the Europe that protects, Europe that paves the way and opens roads and provides opportunities. This means that the European way of life has the asylum, safety, security, refugee policies. It works as Europe as a shield, but it has the youth, culture, education, it's mobility, skills. It's where Europe presents opportunities. We put these two together for the first time at the European level under a common umbrella, and I believe that it was a proper decision, the appropriate decision, and the appropriate toolbox, as it were, because what happened over the past 3 years confirms the correctness of this choice, because we need to work on these fields together, rather than in a fragmented way. Well, the issue of immigration, and I will circle back to Italy, although Meloni herself does not have that as high on her agenda as her state partners, but in Europe it is urgent to achieve a new agreement on asylum, isn't it? Well, I believe that the only positive thing from the Ukrainian crisis, the war, if you'd like, is that a horizontal universal protection we extended to the Ukrainian refugees, approximately 5 million of them that we accepted in our societies under a European umbrella, was the pretext or the opportunity, as it were, to normalize, to detox, as it were, detoxify, normalize once again discussion around immigration in Europe. Discussion about immigration in Europe became far too toxic, far too aggressive. So we need some positivity in this discussion. and the millions of Ukrainian refugees who entered our societies in a smooth way helped in the normalization of this issue. What we're still missing is the last step, which is the completion of this agreement on asylum and refugee. We like to call it a new accord, a new European accord. We have already promoted the discussions, and we have agreement on 50 or 60% of our proposals. There's still 40% missing. Responsibility of maintaining the borders and solidarity and sharing the burdens among the member states is still what missing. And I should like to repeat what I said in the beginning, Mr. Andritsos. I believe that the new Italian government has its best interests in working for the European agreement on immigration. I mean, I don't have any signs to see that the new players in Italy will believe that they will be better off without this European accord. They need it as much as the rest of us do. And before we close, Mr. Schinas, Mr. Vice President, regarding energy, what will be, in your opinion, there, the way things will evolve? Because, well, you do realize that this winter the fewer possible Europeans must lag behind, none if we can help it, so that we will not have this these monstrosities of extremisms that will shatter the European foundation and the building. What will be what will happen in the worst case scenario? Best case scenario would be that we will have an agreement tomorrow. There is an agreement about the threshold or the ceiling, as it were, the limits of the fuel prices. Will the member states dare, because there is the Commission's proposal on the table, will the member states dare do that? Well, Mr. Andritsos, dear friends, I would like to paint a more optimistic picture. Because we did have crises in 1973 and in 1979. There were huge energy crises in Europe and the world over. And at the time, we lacked both the alternatives in oil, petroleum, or the technological solutions, or the geostrategic solutions we have now and options. And, well, we did make it through those times, and we have the same chances of making it now, if not more. But we shouldn't forget that the situation we are in today is the result of an immoral instrumentalization of this energy crisis by Russia. This is something that us, free Europeans, will not forget. We're putting a pin on it for the future. It's not the war of Suez that was waged against others and we had to suffer the consequences in 1973. This is a direct, universal attack against the Europeans. So we try to cope using a plexus and a nexus of interventions that provides an answer to this threat. Our disentanglement and our lack of dependence from Russia has been reduced to 49–50%, and we have alternatives the world over that enter this game to help us. We have increased and we have filled our storage of natural gas at an unprecedented level that will allow us to not have big problems this winter. We have proposed, we have put on the table a very important package of measures that will affect prices for the more vulnerable people, and if necessary to have a second wave of interventions after the 30th of September, when we'll have a meeting of the energy ministers. So I should like to transmit a message of hope that this winter we will make it using all these measures. We will make it against an unprecedented situation that we did not create, but we have to suffer, and that we hope will not repeat itself a second time, the winter after. Well, the Belgian Prime Minister talked about 10 winters to come, Mr. Schinas, didn't he? Well, I believe that my friend Alexander Duclos probably overreacted slightly. I think he regretted it at the moment he said it, when he talked about 10 winters. But it is very certain, come next winter, to stabilize the geopolitical horizon so as not to have problems later on in the future. Right. Thank you so very much for this very interesting intervention and this discussion we had. Be well, stay well, enjoy the rest of your day in Brussels. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you, one and all. Thanks.